All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Leslie Farrington. It is on my computer. If you need to get a hold of me, you are more than welcome to always email me. You can also send me a chat message. This lesson is going to be about English 11's Semester 1, Unit 3. So that is about the dialogue assignments and then the rough draft. The essential questions that we're going to try to answer today for this lesson are: what are the narrative techniques you should focus on? How do you punctuate dialogue? And then what should the rough draft itself look like? For the narrative techniques, I'm going to bring us over to a Prezi actually so that we can kind of go through and look at this together. Let's start us back at the beginning. A personal narrative is a story that is about the author. So it's going to be about you. For this personal narrative, you're talking about a time that you've had a failure, but a personal narrative in general is just about the person who's writing it. The persuasive techniques, or not the persuasive techniques, sorry, the narrative techniques really enhance a personal narrative. So you want to make sure that you use these if possible to make the story more interesting, something that somebody wants to continue reading. The first narrative technique we're going to talk about is point of view. I'm going to make this big actually. So the point of view is who is telling the story and what relationship do they have to the story. A personal narrative is always going to be told in first person. That means that you can use the phrases I and we. I'm going to pop out here for a second. Hello, Debbie. Welcome to the lesson. I'm just getting started, so we're just going through a Prezi talking about the narrative techniques that we're going to use in the rough draft assignment for English 11 Semester 1. I think you're currently probably muted because you get muted when you come in. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to type them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask. You're currently the only student here, so you are more than welcome to interrupt me at any time and ask questions about what we're doing, or if you have other questions too. Are you currently in English 11 Semester 1? Oh, you're muted. Let me unmute you for a second. Are you currently in this class, Debbie, or are you just in regular English, some other English classes? All right. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. If you can, go ahead and shoot me a chat message at any time, and we'll just go ahead and continue on with the point of view. I was just saying that point of view is first person for a personal narrative. It's always going to be about the person who is writing the personal narrative. That's what makes it personal. The next narrative technique we want to talk about is dialogue. You are going to need dialogue in your personal narrative if you want to get full credit. Dialogue is just the conversation between two people or more. You really want to include action in your dialogue if you can, because it makes it more interesting and people want to read it. Dialogue has a couple benefits. First, it helps the reader understand characters better because you're seeing like the things characters are actually saying. It makes it more interesting, and it also can help move the story along, which is great. The next technique is pacing. That's just really how fast or how slowly you're telling a story. So it's not good for the story to go too slowly because it becomes really boring and people lose interest in it and they don't want to pay attention to what you're talking about. But it's also not great for the story to go too fast because sometimes if you're moving too quickly, people are kind of lost. They don't know what's going on, or you maybe missed telling some details that you could have told if you had been a little bit slower. The next one is descriptive writing or imagery. And you have done descriptive writing or sensory writing in probably all of your English classes, and you'll continue to do it. But this is something that you really want to use in a personal narrative because the idea is to pull the reader into what you're talking about. It's going to target one or more of the five senses, so sight, touch, taste, sound, or smell. And the idea is, what do you want the reader to see in their mind? So there's a little example up there that you're more than welcome to read, but it is trying to paint a picture for the person who's reading your narrative. Reflection is defined as the serious thought. The reflection is you as the person writing the story thinking back about the story. What happened during the story? Was there a lesson that you learned during the story? For your personal narrative for this assignment, you are going to be required to give a moral or a lesson that you've learned or some kind of reflection at the end. That's what your conclusion paragraph is going to be all about. Okay, so that's it for narrative techniques, but you need to make sure that you include all those things in your story. The next part, the next small assignment, so narrative techniques is actually assignment 321, and then the next one, punctuating dialogue, is 331. These are both shorter assignments. They are the little soft chalk assignments that you answer the questions and you get your answers right away, so they're auto-graded, but they are both going to be important when you're actually going to write your essay. So for 331, there is a Prezi that's in the actual lesson, and I'm going to go through it with you just briefly so we can kind of talk about the things that are in there and why they're important and why you need to make sure how to punctuate your dialogue correctly. So dialogue is obviously, we just talked about, words spoken by characters in a story. Without punctuation, your dialogue is really more difficult to read. If you use punctuation in your dialogue, you can see that the people's individual talking is a lot easier to see. You can see who's talking, what their actions are, and it just makes it look nicer. So when you're writing your personal narrative, you're going to make sure that you write yours correctly. So it gives clarity, and we're going to talk about how to make it clear. The first thing you're going to use is quotation marks. You're going to put the quotes on both sides of the person talking. Whatever they're saying, those words have to be enclosed. So it's at the beginning and the end of whatever they're saying, and these little marks are the quotation marks. So the example is 7th grade language arts students are working on an assignment. A student near the front of the room yells, "Mr. White." And those are the quotation marks right there. The next thing that you have to have are ID tags. So the ID tags clarify who's speaking. It is before, during, or after the quote, and it's not needed for the entire conversation. So if you're going back and forth between two people talking, you don't have to put an ID tag for every single time they talk, but you definitely want to make sure that the reader can understand who is saying what. So, sorry, the student says, and raises his hand. This is the ID tag right here where it says the student says. Oh, you must have a question or comment, says the teacher. What can I do for you? This is the ID tag. The student says, I'm not sure how to do number 3. The teacher walks over and helps the student. So the ID tag is here. So for this first sentence, the ID tag is after the quote. The second group, the ID tag is in the middle. And the last paragraph, the ID tag is at the beginning. So you see that it can be really in any spot. Punctuation can be a few different things. You need to have commas that introduce a quote and stay outside the quote. So if it's the beginning, you have to have it before the quote. If your commas are at the end of a quote, they go inside the quotes. And then start each quote with a capital letter unless it's after an ID tag in the middle of the quote, which is kind of a lot of different things to think about. But I'm going to go back here for a second. If you have your quotation mark before your ID tag, you're going to put a comma at the end, but inside the quote. If you have your comma before the quote, after the ID tag, but before the quote, you're going to put the comma outside of the quotation mark. Okay? Hopefully that makes it a little bit more simple. Oh, the other thing I want to mention, that if you are starting it, you always have to have a capital letter here at the beginning of your quote. The only exception to that would be if you're in the middle of a sentence, like, oh, you must have a question or comment, what can I do for you? This is a lowercase one because it's a continuation of this quote over here. I'm going to skip back to where we were before. Sorry for all the jumping. The next thing you need to have are paragraphs. And this is really important and something that I see sometimes students not doing correctly, that you have to have a new paragraph for each new speaker. When you're looking at your narrative essay, you're going to see that it has to be 5 paragraphs. That does not mean 5 little chunks of dialogue, but you do need a new paragraph for every time a new speaker talks. A speaker's dialogue can be part of another full paragraph, but it can't be in the same paragraph as another speaker's lines. So there are actions happening here, like this is a paragraph, right? But it's only having one speaker in it. So as you see, each one of these paragraphs is one speaker. And this is a really short line, but it's its own paragraph because the student's talking here, the teacher's talking here, the teacher's talking here. So you have to have its own paragraph. Okay. Popping on down. Questions? Debbie, if you have any questions, please at any point feel free to Send me a chat if you can see the chat box in the screen there. And if not, we're going to go ahead and move on. I also have my contact information right here if anybody needs that as you're going back and watching this. We're going to go ahead and move on to the rough draft part. Sorry. The rough draft is assignment 3.4.1. Rough draft has to be 5 paragraphs. And I put an exclamation point there because that is the biggest issue that I see with this lesson, is that a lot of people write me like one large paragraph instead of breaking it up into the different paragraphs for each different thing that's happening. You also sometimes, I sometimes see people forgetting to do separate paragraphs for the dialogue. You're going to see when we go through what each paragraph has to be, that paragraphs, like body paragraphs 1 and 2 and 3 could have dialogue in them, but those still need to be whole paragraphs by themselves. It should be written about yourself, and it should describe a time you've failed. This is the rubric. I'm actually going to pull you over to the assignment itself. So when you look at lesson 3.4, it's called Write a Rough Draft. But if you go through here, there's like this little intro, there's a little video, and then you go to the 3rd page and it gives you the entire rubric. I think a lot of times we maybe forget to look at the rubric, or this is located at the lesson. It's not located, we're not looking at the actual, the activity itself doesn't show you the rubric right by it. So I want you to know that the rubric is in lesson 3.4 at the last page. And it shows you the purpose is to entertain and teach a lesson. The audience is your online classmates and teacher. And then it gives you the specifics about what each paragraph needs to look like. It also shows you that you're being graded on sensory language and conventions. So sensory language is that descriptive language, the 5 senses, and then conventions are, did you check for punctuation? Did you make sure you use capital letters? Did you do your quotes correctly? Things like that. When I'm going through the next chunk of slides are going to be focused on what you need to have in each set of paragraphs. And I'm going to highlight what is in the A, the exceeding expectations category, because I'm assuming most of you are shooting for an A. I will pop back over though and show you this rising action for these paragraphs, what happens if you don't put dialogue in. So the first part, the intro paragraph, the exposition begins with an engaging hook and thesis, and it reflects the prompt given. And the topic is unique, engaging, and narrow enough for a narrative essay. So it's not so broad that you could never possibly write about it in 5 paragraphs, but it is engaging, meaning people want to read it when they read about what your intro is. I'm giving you an example intro that I wrote. My example, all the examples that I'm giving you will be in blue, so you can kind of differentiate between the regular text and the example text is the text that I'm using. A swing and a miss, my best friend Katie and I were trying out for the softball team. We planned on trying out together, getting on the team together, and having an awesome time together. We didn't plan on one of us failing miserably. I've never claimed to be a baseball prodigy. I didn't have any exceptional skill. I had only 2 years of Pee Wee softball under my belt. The arrogance of youth told me this didn't matter and I would make it anyway. I was wrong. So the idea is that you want to introduce your topic, you want to make it interesting, and you want to make sure that you have told the person who's reading your essay what you are writing about. So I'm hoping that it's very clear from my paragraph that my topic is my failure to make the softball team when I was in school. You are going to have 3 body paragraphs. When you're looking at the rubric, the 3 body paragraphs are broken up into body paragraphs 1 and 2, which is your rising action, and then body paragraph 3 is your climax. The first 2 body paragraphs describe in detail the rising action. The writing is interesting and topic sentences are clear. Dialogue should be included, engaging, and punctuated correctly. So this is, if you want to get an A, these are the things you have to include in the body paragraph 1 and 2. The climax is the 3rd body paragraph. It describes in detail the climax of the story. Writing is both exciting and interesting. So, looking at body paragraphs 1 and 2, for me, if I was writing this essay, they would describe the way tryouts went, which was not well, how I was feeling during that week, trying to pull people into my experience by giving them descriptive descriptions of what's going on in vivid language. The dialogue would be about conversations between my friend and me, as well as between the coach and me. This is a sample of like dialogue I would include. I've got it, I yelled as I ran toward the ball. It sailed past me, hitting the ground behind me. I turned and looked at my friend, red in the face. So this is one paragraph because I'm speaking, and then this is the action that's happening. But now that she's speaking, I have to start a new paragraph. Maybe not quite, she said, laughing. Let me get it next time. This is a lowercase letter because I'm continuing on with the dialogue that's happening at the beginning of the sentence. The dialogue tag is in the middle, so there's a comma, but then there's a lowercase letter here. The climax is the third body paragraph. So describing the last day of tryouts and finding out I didn't make the team, I would describe my feelings and frustrations. Did it feel like when I looked at the list and didn't see my name? So this is your moment of failure paragraph. You have to use sensory details and vivid descriptions. You really want to pull your reader in and make them feel what you felt like when this situation happened to you. And then the resolution offers a reflective lesson or theme that's engaging and unique. So for my conclusion paragraph, the example I'm using here, after my humiliating experience not making the softball team, I didn't think I'd ever want to try out for anything again. Once I got past the sting of failure, I realized that I should take something from the experience. I decided that next year I was going to try out for a sport I actually liked. I worked hard practicing basketball, and when the time for tryouts came, I relied on my skills instead of my arrogance. Making a team never felt so good. So the idea of the lesson learned is this idea of the fact that if you want to do something successfully, you have to put in the effort for it. So these are the paragraphs, the 5 body paragraphs. And one thing before I close out here, I want to really make sure that everybody sees is that in the rising action body paragraphs, you have to include the dialogue, which is what we talked about earlier. If you don't include dialogue, you can't get higher than an F for this section of it. So for the body paragraphs, if you have no dialogue, you can't get a passing grade for the body paragraphs. And if you put dialogue in, you can at least get a C, even if the dialogue is punctuated correctly. So if you are unsure about it, first of all, message me. I'd be happy to help you figure out how to write it. But even if you write it incorrectly, you still get some points for that. So please make sure that you're putting in the effort of doing the dialogue, because it really does make your writing better, but it also gets you more points. So you definitely want to do that. Again, my contact information is right here. So I know this is a shorter lesson because we didn't have a lot of questions or anything like that, which is totally fine. But I am more than happy to help anybody out. So you can always send me a chat message at Leslie Farrington or an email, leslie.farrington@graduationalliance.com. And I would be happy to answer any of your questions about this lesson, but also any of the other English lessons as well. So thank you for watching.